The Paddy Power Half Hour on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Jeff and Heskey.
Yes, you're very welcome along to the Paddy Power Half Hour here on Off the Ball. We're streaming live across all of our social channels and on OTB Sports Radio. Will O'Callaghan and Phil Egan should be with me. Guys, how are you?
Good, yeah.
Everything's Andy, you well?
How are you getting on in your little lockdown sessions there?
Yeah, I suppose at this point, Enda, it's just a case of trying to fill in the time. I've probably watched quite a few classic games over the last while. I've definitely been reading an awful lot more than I would have done. So I'm watching a lot less TV than this week. I think probably hit Netflix a little bit too hard on week number 1. So trying to just deflect and do other things, and setting up wrestling podcasts with Richie McCormick if I can get a free plug in for Off the Top Rope, which is live now on the YouTube page for Off the Ball as well. And then I suppose having to think about some of the topics and ideas you've brought up for today.
Phil, you've been looking back at some classic matches. You were on the Classic Game Club yesterday with Nathan Murphy and Stephen Doyle, looking back at the Liverpool 5-0 win against Nottingham Forest in 1988. What was so special about that Liverpool team?
Well, first of all, it was brilliant to actually watch a match the other night. I even came down at half time for a cup of tea to clear my head after a pulsating first half. But that Liverpool team, there was so much similar to what we see with the current crop under Jurgen Klopp. Plenty of energy, players that can play on the break, obviously plenty of skill in there as well. And, you know, it has to go down as one of the great Liverpool teams. Obviously, it was something we touched on with the Classic Game Club, that because there was the European ban, Liverpool probably didn't get as much recognition because they obviously were... and the fact that they didn't win the league the following season, they had that dramatic final day defeat to Arsenal as well. So, no, brilliant team. John Barnes, Peter Beardsley in particular were brilliant that night, and Alan Hansen was quality. And off the back of it then, I know Nathan was talking to John Giles about his best Liverpool 11. So I mentioned John Barnes, Alan Hansen were in it as well. And interesting to see John picked a couple of the modern day players as well, Virgil van Dijk and Andy Robertson. Quite a team he put together as well. The Stephen Gerrard in midfield with Graham Souness and John Barnes and Kenny Dalglish and Kevin Keegan with Ian Rush. There was a pretty good team selection from John.
It would definitely take some beating. If you want to listen back to any of the Classic Game Club, you can find them on the Off the Ball YouTube channel. Phil is up there with Stephen Doyle. We also did the Celtic 6-2 game against Rangers last week, and there's loads more to find that as well. And if you want to listen back to John's team of Liverpool selection over the last couple of years, then you can find that on Off the Ball across our social channels as well. We are here to talk about the football, and it is a massive weekend of football, Phil. The Belarusian League is back still. It was a bad week for Bate Borisov last week, but this week the main focus is definitely the Minsk derby between FC Minsk and Dynamo Minsk.
Yeah, I mean, if that doesn't get the juices flowing, I don't know what will. But yeah, last week was the first week. It was the first weekend of the Belarusian Premier League, and we mentioned it last week how Bate Borisov are no longer the champions. Dinamo Brest are the champions. They won their first league title last season. So Bate Borisov already playing catch-up because they didn't win last weekend. So I don't know how long the Belarusian league can keep going, because, you know, football has pretty much come to a halt. We even talked about the Australian A-League last Friday, but that's since been brought to a standstill as well. They were playing behind closed doors, but that's gone as well. So you'd imagine the Belarusian league is going to be close to follow.
Yeah, I think it was inevitable that the A-League was going to be called off, and the AFL was also postponed as well. So it was almost as if they're fighting against an inevitable cause when you're looking at Australia playing those games. But obviously this show, the Paddy Power Half Hour, every Friday here on Off the Ball at 12 p.m, it usually is looking forward to the Premier League weekend. We obviously don't have any Premier League games to look forward to, but instead we're going to be talking a little bit about different debates, not so much in-your-face debates, but just discussions about the topics of the week, the general... I know there's not any football going on, but there is general talking points going on during the week, and we picked out 3 for you this week. We're going to start with Alan Shearer's comments about Harry Kane. Shearer was talking earlier on this week, and he basically said that if Harry Kane doesn't win a trophy within a year with Spurs, then he should leave. Now, I actually don't agree with him on that point, but I want to get your opinion, Phil and Will, first. What do you think Harry Kane should do? Should he stay at Spurs and become a hero of the club, or should he leave and try focus on personal trophies?
Depends how many medals he wants, Enda. I mean, Harry Kane has been playing for Spurs now since 2010-11 season, I think was his debut with the first team. He was involved in the squad from 2010. They haven't won a trophy in that period. The last silverware they actually lifted was way back in 2008 under Juan de Ramos when they won the League Cup. They missed out on chances for cups this year, particularly. They were knocked out of the FA Cup and League Cup in pretty quick succession under Jose Mourinho. They've been knocked out of Europe as well. So when the Premier League season gets back underway, the best Spurs can do is try and push for the top four. Obviously, he's played in a few big games where potentially Spurs could have won a title when they were running Leicester reasonably close a few years ago. He played in the Champions League final, not entirely fit, against Liverpool last summer. But aside from that, Spurs haven't really threatened to win too much in the rest of the time that Harry Kane has been there. Obviously, he's transformed the club with the amount of goals that he scored for them, and they'll be hoping that he's had a long rest now after that hamstring injury that he picked up on New Year's Day, and they'll be hoping that he comes back into what should be the peak period really of his career over the next 2 to 3 seasons. It's going to be very interesting as well. Shearer kind of admitted but brushed it away, the idea that Harry Kane might end up scoring more Premier League goals than him. I think he's on 131 now. Shearer still has about 130 of a gap. But if Harry Kane was to stay in the Premier League, whether that be staying with Tottenham or if he was to move inside the league, I think he's definitely going to challenge for that total eventually. It all depends in terms of, how much he wants to go for personal glory. Alan Shearer is probably a good guy, Enda, to talk about this, because the argument always was that he was probably too loyal when he went to his boyhood club Newcastle, also making that decision to go to Newcastle as opposed to Manchester United, where Shearer, I've no doubt, would have went on to win European Cups and probably multiple Premier League medals to go with the one he won at Blackburn as well. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, Spurs obviously have to match the ambition of some of the players they have at the club, particularly Harry Kane. We spoke about this when Jose Mourinho took over. There's a squad there which is much better than their position in the Premier League, which Mauricio Pochettino was sacked, had left the club in. It's just going to be interesting to see whether they can compete for trophies and whether he would get itchy feet at that stage, because Harry Kane's going to be very aware that his current contract takes him up till, I think he's 29 when the contract finishes. So his next move is either going to be to sign a contract to pretty much extend his stay at Spurs and stay there for the rest of his career, or he's going to go and try and pursue pastures new. And if he's going to leave, we know that Tottenham and Daniel Levy are going to look for absolute top dollar. But with Spurs, Enda, if they decide they're not going to sell, generally they accept eventually a price. We've seen this with the likes of Dimitar Berbatov in the past, Luka Modric, Gareth Bale. Eventually, when these players are sought from elsewhere and bids come in, Spurs will eventually fold and sell them. So I don't believe for a moment that Spurs wouldn't sell Harry Kane if some kind of crazy offer came in.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're probably in a different position now to when they were with Gareth Bale and Berbatov. They were very much seen as cashing in on those players to build a club for the future that is now the present, and a squad that have been competing for these trophies. They haven't won anything, but they have been up and around the top four for the last couple of years, especially under Pochettino. Phil, what do you think? I want to touch on something Will said there as well. If Harry Kane does leave Tottenham, does he stay in the Premier League or does he go foreign? Because obviously he's going to come into some more stick if he goes to a Premier League club, but English players haven't exactly thrived when they've gone out to the likes of Spain, Italy and less so in France.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he was to go abroad, where does he go? Is Harry Kane good enough to play up front for Real Madrid or Barcelona? I'm not so sure. I don't know what the future holds for him in terms of injuries, because he seems to be picking up injuries every season that keep him out for almost a quarter of the season. He still bangs in goals when he's fit. He seems to come back sharp enough, and then after the adrenaline wears off, he doesn't look as sharp. You're looking at his record now. He scored 181 league goals, or 181 goals rather, for Spurs. Jimmy Greaves, 266, is Tottenham's all-time leading goal scorer. So Harry Kane, does he want to become a Tottenham legend and try and surpass Jimmy Greaves? 85 goals to make up. He's 26. If Harry Kane played 3/4 of a season for the next 4 years, he's going to surpass Jimmy Greaves. But, here we are sitting in isolation. Premier League footballers are no different. They've got a lot of time to think. Is Harry Kane now starting to weigh up his options, thinking, I could stay at Spurs and become their top scorer, but I might not win anything. Will mentioned the last thing they won was a League Cup. Is a League Cup really good enough for Harry Kane that he has his eyes on bigger prizes. Spurs have got to the Champions League final last June. They didn't win it. They've gone backwards since. It doesn't look like Jose Mourinho is the right manager to rebuild. So I wonder, would Harry Kane think maybe there's a move there? If he was going to move to somebody in the Premier League, who would want him? Look at the top teams at the moment. Would he get into the Liverpool team? Don't think he would suit the way Jurgen Klopp likes to play. Would Manchester City want him? Manchester United is the obvious choice, because as good as Martial can be, Kane would be more consistent. He'd bang in goals. He gives you that focal point. And, at the moment, United are trying to build. They're trying to close the gap on those top two. And someone like Harry Kane could be just the signing for them.
There's a lot of ifs and buts in what I'm about to say, but if the dominoes were to fall into place and Pochettino took over Real Madrid, like he has been rumoured to in the next year or so, does he suit Real Madrid down to the ground? Because Benzema is currently at the end of his career. He's not really doing it for them anymore. Jovic was a complete flop for them. They don't really have that centre forward. I know Hazard was their marquee signing last year. They do like at least one big signing every year or every 2 years. And Harry Kane would certainly replace, he wouldn't completely replace Ronaldo in terms of goals, but you're getting at least 25 to 30 goals in Harry Kane for a season. So if Pochettino were to take over Real Madrid, even if he's not to take over Real Madrid, they seem like the obvious club outside of the Premier League to take Harry Kane.
Yeah, I think a fully fit Harry Kane is probably the best pure number 9 in football at the moment. And we have an interesting time coming ahead if we're going to mention the two big Spanish clubs as a potential destination, because, as you mentioned, Karim Benzema is probably into his last couple of seasons. They tried to bring in Luka Jovic as a player who was meant to contest the number 9 position, but he's had an absolute nightmare in Madrid so far. Probably worth remembering that Benzema started off very slowly in his first season when he was in the Spanish capital as well. But Jovic, I think, could well be a player that's punted back on pretty quickly. And Barcelona have the problem that Luis Suarez is not getting any younger. He is 33 this summer, and he has picked up an increasing number of injuries as well. He's currently rehabbing a knee injury, which will keep him out till the end of the summer. Realistically, they probably need to look for a pure number 9, because Antoine Griezmann, who was their kind of, I guess, medium-term solution to the Luis Suarez ageing issue, has not slotted in very well in the games where he's had to play up front. He's looked very lost in that Barcelona attack. I think if they're looking for a pure number 9, there's nobody better that they could buy in Europe than Harry Kane. And similarly, I would imagine that Manchester United would be the destination that seems most obvious. The big question about Manchester United, though, is will they provide the opportunity to win trophies any more so than Tottenham Hotspur would? I think they probably have a slightly better chance, but it's not like if Harry Kane was to make the move up to Manchester and join the United side, I don't know if he would realistically be winning that many trophies by going there. They're still at a kind of a step of their development, as opposed to if Harry Kane was joining Liverpool or Man City, who are ready-made to compete for multiple trophies. Yeah,
and when we spoke about doing this topic, I was trying to think of some players that were in a similar enough position to Harry Kane and what they did in this situation. I suppose Thierry Henry is one, but he had already won trophies with Arsenal, so his step up, he was already stepping up from a very high peak in terms of his Arsenal career. Henrik Larsson chose to stay with Celtic for a while, but then eventually he moved on to Barcelona and went on to better things. Luis Suarez is an interesting one because he made the decision to leave Liverpool after they had finished second, and he really seen that this wasn't really going anywhere, and he moved to Barcelona and had a massive amount of success with them. He's probably the best example of the move working out for the best. Another Liverpool striker that moved in the hope of winning more trophies, it didn't work out for him, and that was Fernando Torres. He's probably the exact example of what not to do.
I don't know, and I think Fernando Torres might argue that against you when he says he won the Europa League and the Champions League when he was at Chelsea.
He did, but his personal brand definitely took a massive hit in that first season and a half with Chelsea. He definitely was not the player that he was with Liverpool.
Yeah, I think he would have been broken. I'm interested what Phil thinks on this, but I think Fernando Torres would have been broken whether he stayed at Liverpool or left. That knee injury he picked up and rushing back to playing the World Cup in 2010 did serious damage to his long-term career.
Do you think, Phil, what do you think? Do you think people remember Fernando Torres for that Champions League campaign, or do you think they remember him for the brilliant striker he was at Liverpool?
I think when he left Liverpool, I think Liverpool fans, as tough as it was to take for them at the time, the best of Fernando Torres was gone. We'd seen the best of him, and then he goes to Chelsea, and sure, he wins trophies. He just wasn't the same player. In terms of Suarez wanted to leave the summer of 2013. I could actually remember when Liverpool were over in Dublin. They were playing a friendly against Celtic, and Brendan Rodgers was under serious pressure at the time in terms of the press conference, just asking questions about Suarez, and he was adamant he wasn't going. He didn't. He stayed. He had an unbelievable season. He got them so close to winning a Premier League title. Didn't happen. And I think Liverpool had accepted then that, you know what, you've given all you can give. We asked you to stay for the season, and he obviously moved on, because at one stage there was talk of going to Arsenal. I think Stephen Gerrard stepped in and said, look, stay with us for another season. Don't go to Arsenal. You'll get your move. You have a good season for us. You get your move. With Harry Kane, and Alan Shearer is in a good position to talk about this, but the difference with Shearer is he had won his league title with Blackburn before he went to Newcastle. And the reason Blackburn did win the Premier League title was because of Alan Shearer, and obviously some other quality players, but Shearer made such a difference. With Harry Kane, if he was to go to United, they're definitely in a better position than Tottenham to challenge for trophies, because they're on an upward curve. Obviously, we've seen the impact Bruno Fernandes has made. Spurs are on a downward curve at the moment, and we don't know. The season is just, we don't know what's happening with the rest of the season. We don't know with the transfer window, how messy that's going to be, how short a window it's going to be, what kind of business you could get done. But if Harry Kane was to go to United, you could see him winning trophies. Whether he wins a Premier League or a Champions League, we don't know, because you mentioned Pochettino to Real Madrid. Is Pochettino going to end up at Manchester United? Things were going rather well for Solskjaer before the shutdown of football, but we've seen this before, and we don't know if how long-term Solskjaer is. A lot of people would feel that get a different manager in there, you get even more out of this United squad.
Yeah, and obviously everything we're talking about here comes with the asterisk that it is hypothetical. Obviously, we don't really know where football is at the minute. We don't know whether it's going to continue. We don't even know how they're going to end the season. So this is very much just a general chit-chat of what's happening. And obviously we know that there is more important things going on in the world other than football. But hopefully this is just a welcome distraction from that. We're going to move on to our next topic. And Will, you gave this away on Twitter earlier on. Our dream Premier League striker, signing. So this is basically from 1992 to the present day. If you could sign one player, who would it be? Will, you already give yours away as Thierry Henry. We'll get back to you in a second. Phil, who did you go with?
Well, you would have, if you were listening to me in the last few minutes, you would have known I gave Alan Shearer the big up there, and that's who I would sign, because this is the player that when he moved to Blackburn, he turned them into title challengers. And then the following season, after running United so close, then they went and they got that league title. And just to put into perspective his goal record, so 260 goals in the Premier League. Only 11 times in the Premier League has a striker scored more than 30 goals. So you're looking at Enda Coll, Henry, Kevin Phillips, Ronaldo, Harry Kane, Van Persie, Suarez, Salah. One each. Alan Shearer did it 3 times. There's players that never got more than 30. Remember Jamie Vardy in the 2015-16 season, how good he was for Leicester. He didn't get 30 goals. Sergio Aguero's never got more than 30 goals in a Premier League season. It's an unbelievable achievement. And I just think if you would put him into any Premier League team, and you touched on it earlier, if he had signed for Manchester United, he obviously would have won a lot more trophies. He went for the option of Newcastle. But could you imagine how good he would have been at United?
He would have been phenomenal. I mean, I suppose United would have been signing him at the turn of the millennium, and that was when I think he was more of a 90 striker than a naughty striker, in my opinion. But that's really when
the knee injury. The knee injury did him damage. Now he still adapted, because before the knee injury, he obviously had. He was always powerful, but he actually had a lot more pace. So when the knee injury came in, he adapted, and he's just so physical, an absolute nightmare. His elbows going everywhere, back to goal. And I just love the way his finishing was just absolutely smash the ball into the net.
he had the most, I don't know, the strongest strike of a striker you can think of in the last 10, 15, 20 years. As far as like you said, he just smashed the ball into the net. There was no delicate touch within his shots. But, Will, you've gone for a man who was nothing but delicate with the ball, Thierry Henry.
Yeah, I suppose a kind of a different way of thinking on this. I would agree with Phil entirely in terms of the best pure goal scorer in the Premier League era is Alan Shearer. Alan Shearer definitely won a Premier League title for Blackburn with some decent supporting cast around him, but his goals were so crucial in that period under Jack Walker, and when they eventually made the breakthrough to win the league in '95. He very nearly made the move out into Europe. He almost joined Barcelona under Bobby Robson. In the end, they signed a young player called Ronaldo. I'm not sure exactly how he went on after that. And then obviously a couple of years later, when Cantona retired, Alex Ferguson tried repeatedly to try and sign Alan Shearer, and tried to sign him the season afterwards as well, when they ended up with Dwight York, as opposed to being able to get Shearer at that time as well. But a player who signed for Arsenal around the same time, but who came to the fore really 2 or 3 seasons later, was Thierry Henry. I know it's difficult as an Irish person perhaps to pick Henry, but for me, he was the best player in the Premier League era. Cristiano Ronaldo went on to become World Player of the Year, but probably most of his best football was probably played at Real Madrid after he left Manchester United in 2009, despite having a few remarkable seasons at the tail end of his time at United. I think Henry was probably just a cut above that, particularly in the kind of period of 2002 through to 2005, 2006. We can go on about the numbers that were scored by Alan Shearer, but Thierry Henry racked up consecutive 20 goals and 20 assist plus seasons as well, which is remarkable. He was as much of a creator as he was a goal scorer, a scorer of beautiful goals, and perhaps one of the most important elements as well, he made football a lot of fun to watch as well. So if you were going to draft a player into a team just for pure entertainment value, if you could get Thierry Henry in his early to mid-20s, he's the player I would pick every single time. He's
an absolutely beautiful player to watch. He's like a gazelle running with the ball. It looks like he's barely touching his feet. If you go back and watch that 04 season, he was absolutely untouchable in terms of players in the Premier League. I thought he was phenomenal at the time, and obviously he had his signature finish, which was across the goalkeeper, which arguably most goalkeepers should be able to get to, but they just didn't seem to be able to get to Thierry Henry's shots. I've struggled with this, to be honest, because originally I thought it was just a dream signing, so mine would have been Zinedine Zidane. I've written down 4 names, but I'm going to pick one of them. So who I have in front of me, I've named 2 of them already in this discussion, and that was Fernando Torres in his peak and Luis Suarez in his peak. I thought both of them were unbelievable for Liverpool. Nightmares of Torres turning Vidic inside out in the Manchester United versus Liverpool games back in the day. He had lightning pace, unbelievable finish, and his blonde hair was just there was something about him. He was just an unbelievable player. But I'm going to go with Frank Lampard because his goal scoring record for a midfielder is ridiculous. But not only that, he was a brilliant midfielder as well. He could do everything. And I always thought the argument between him and Gerrard was nonsensical. For me, it was Frank Lampard every single day of the week.
Really?
Yeah.
I did Gerrard over him, and
I thought Frank Lampard was phenomenal.
Put Gerrard into that Chelsea team, I think he would have excelled even more. Obviously, Gerrard came close to joining Chelsea, but he wanted to stay at Liverpool. And, you know, he obviously won things at Liverpool. He didn't win as much as Lampard, but that's because he wanted to stay at Liverpool. And Gerrard played with some really average players at times at Liverpool. You mentioned Torres, you mentioned Suarez. They were obviously the great players that he played with at Liverpool, but he played with some bang average players at times and had to do a lot on his own. And you don't get into Johnny Giles, Liverpool 11.
No, well, I'm definitely
if you're not a good player.
I'm definitely not disregarding Gerrard's talent. I just prefer Lampard as a player. But obviously, there are going to be people getting onto us here, so I better mention that I do have Roy Keane's name written down in front of me here as one of my options. I just didn't want to be the stereotypical Irish person that chose Roy Keane as his Premier League signing. I also think that Damien Duff is worth a mention here. I was kind of that Chelsea 04-05 team was sort of the team that were dominating as I was starting to really pay attention to football, and Damien Duff was absolutely brilliant. Like, you forget that he was pushing Arjen Robben and Joe Cole out of a team.
Yeah, it depends as well what you're looking for in a signing, because we've all gone with goal scorers. Obviously Lampard, the midfielder, so you've picked the deepest of the players, but think back to a couple of seasons ago and look at the transformation in Liverpool since Van Dijk has come in, a centre half. Then some people, you think back to when United signed Peter Schmeichel, what a difference he made. So it doesn't necessarily obviously have to be a match winner. And Roy Keane would just change how the dressing room is because he demands the best. So there's a lot to be said for what you're looking for in a signing. I think goal scoring is something that is probably the hardest thing to get. You can set up as defensively as you want, but if you haven't got a goal scorer, you're not going to win enough games.
Yeah, exactly. And I said I had a wild card pick for this, and it's not so much who I would sign, but it's who I think would be perfect for Manchester United at the minute. And it's a previous player of theirs, Ji-sung Park. I think if they added him into their team, that just his work rate, his tempo and his defensive qualities, I didn't really appreciate them at the time, but I was watching back some of the United matches from 2008, 2007, that season where the seasons where Ronaldo obviously dominated, and Ji-sung Park was starting centre midfield. I know Ryan Giggs started quite a few games as well in centre midfield, but Ji-sung Park was underrated, to say the least.
Yeah, no, he's a good player, and it was one of those things, I guess, the run of probably big game Ji-sung Park maybe ended in the 2011 Champions League final, when just understandably they came up against probably the best midfield ever at club football with Busquets, Xavi and Iniesta. But aside from that, I think Ji-sung Park never looked out of place, particularly in big games in the Champions League. He was a huge player for United. Always seemed to play well for some reason against Arsenal as well. I'm not sure why. He seemed to relish that fixture. I think if I was to have a wildcard pick on this one, I'd put in a player that just aesthetically I like a lot. And I know Kevin De Bruyne has probably taken the fore at Man City as this player's got older and declined. But David Silva has just been remarkable for Man City over the last decade as well. He's been such a key player in their success. Obviously, Aguero is the one who'll be remembered for the breakthrough Premier League because of the late goal. But David Silva has just been a measure of consistency, and he just plays the game so beautifully as well. So again, if I was going to make a dream signing for a team, I think David Silva will be right up there as well.
Yeah, I think people forget that he was actually signed from Valencia as a sort of nippy winger, and how he transformed his career under Pep Guardiola and changed the way that he played the game has been something to behold over the last couple of years in the Premier League. Phil, any wildcard picks for you?
Well, it feels very strange that we're talking about the Premier League and who's the most successful club in the Premier League era. It's Manchester United, and we haven't really mentioned even the likes of Paul Scholes. We mentioned Roy Keane there. Van Persie was exactly kind of what we're looking at when we talk about a dream signing. He came in and won a league title. He was brought in to win the league title, and his goals provided United with their last league title in Alex Ferguson's last years. So other players, you think of Rio Ferdinand again, was he was a big signing for United. Him and Vidic formed that great central defensive partnership. So I said it would feel strange not to be mentioning all these United players because they've been the most dominant team in the Premier League era. In terms of other players, like Hazard is a player I really like, but one thing that would put me off is sometimes we've seen with Chelsea, they've down tools for certain managers where as soon as the manager goes, someone else comes in and the new manager gets a tune out of these players, and Hazard unfortunately falls into that category where, when he wants to do it, he can do it.
Yeah, I think there's a few players in the Premier League that I've watched throughout the years that when they turn it on, they're just unstoppable. And I remember a game, and I always bring it up, when Hazard was playing against Brighton or Huddersfield. I'm not sure who it was against, but first 2 minutes of the game, they hacked him out of it. I think they fouled him 3 or 4 times in the opening 6 minutes. And you just see a point where he just snaps his fingers and he's like, I'm going to destroy you today. And he did. He went on to score 2 goals. I think he set up 2 as well. And it's just those players that can turn it on at the click of their fingers. They are the ones that we remember. We were going to talk about Jadon Sancho, but we're kind of out of time at this stage. And since there's no football on, we might hold our fire on whatever topics we have these days. Lads, thanks very much for coming on the show today. A reminder that our football coverage is brought to you with Paddy Power. For more information on responsible gambling, visit dunlewy.net. Lads, you're going to be back with us again for the Paddy Power half hour next Friday. Until then, stay safe. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, lads.
The Paddy Power Half Hour on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Jeff and Heskey.